a giant wave holding aloft the hopes and memories of a people once divided by the Berlin Wall. 30,000 handwritten messages hang in front of the Brandenburg Gate. It was here in June 1987 that then US President Ronald Reagan uttered this now famous demand to his Soviet counterpart.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
2 years after President Reagan's speech, Germans themselves would tear down the wall in a dramatic show of people power that would have profound consequences for Germany, for Europe, and for the global order. In the Soviet bloc, pressure had been building for months. Pro-democracy protests spread to East Germany. On November 9th, an East German government spokesman said citizens were now free to travel to the West. The shock announcement was a bureaucratic slip, but East Germans flocked to the border. In the confusion, guards opened the gates. Patrick Hartwig, then 19 years old, was among the first through. He went immediately to the Kurfürstendamm, a shopping district symbolic of Western capitalism. He now works in the very same street.
Dann habe ich die ganze Nacht da am Kudamm, ich habe auf irgendeinem BMW gesessen.
I spent the whole night on the Kurfürstendamm. I was sitting in a random BMW, a bottle of sparkling wine in my hand, and we honked up and down the Kurfürstendamm and had a wild night. 30 years later, I still think the changes were positive. It was a peaceful change.
The events of that night echoed across the world. A few weeks later, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and new US President George Bush announced the Cold War was over.
It seemed as if things were getting more peaceful, that the world was getting to a more peaceful place. Some even said this was the end of history.
By 1991, the Soviet Union had crumbled. But in the 3 decades since, tensions between East and West have re-emerged.
NATO has taken in Poland, the Baltic states, and so on, have seen this as a threat. Although, of course, it wasn't meant as a threat. It wasn't an aggressive NATO which sort of had a drive to the east, but it was the East European countries who applied for NATO membership.
As the new century dawned, Vladimir Putin emerged as Russia's strongman, pledging to rebuild the country's pride and power. In Moscow, the events of 1989 are viewed very differently 3 decades on.
Gorbachev was is now much less accepted than he was then, because he is now seen not only as the person who gave away the GDR, but also as the person who destroyed the Soviet Union. And Putin is, I think, essentially trying to regain part of this Soviet hegemonic position in Europe.
In 2014, Russia forcefully seized Crimea and supported pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. Relations between East and West have plunged. Russia and the United States are rearming. Moscow blames the West for missed opportunities.
It could have been a win-win situation, but for that, the Western countries should have been much wiser.
Germans and visitors from around the world will celebrate the anniversary Saturday, the night freedom came to Berlin. But peace between East and West has remained elusive. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, Berlin.